I don't like candy, and I don't like you. Hello again, and welcome to another edition of Mondays in Midtown. I'm Mark Zinn. On this week's show, first off, this is a great show, but on this week's show, Craig Fugate. Who is he? He is the administrator of FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and we had an exclusive interview with him that you're only going to see here. Also, we had an exclusive interview with Dr. Michael Cox, last week's Great Issues Committee speaker, and his fun times, we should say, on the topic of President Obama and the decline of the American empire. He is the International Studies Chair at the London School of Economics. Very good interview coming there here shortly. But first, ladies and gentlemen, we have breaking news to pass along to you from the city of St. Louis. I talked to Rich Bradley today. You remember Rich Bradley? He's the city's chief engineer, and he says that because of the inclement weather we've been seeing, there's a little delay in the projected closing of the Grand Bridge, and for that matter, the reconstruction project of the Grand Bridge. As previously reported by this humble and objective journalist, the Grand Bridge was slated to close in early March, the first week of March. But because of that inclement weather, it's being pushed back 2 weeks. And before the Grand Bridge can close, the Compton Bridge needs to reopen, because Compton will be a primary detour route once that Grand Bridge closes for 12 to 14 months. So it's being pushed back 2 weeks. So as of right now, Rich is telling me that the Compton Bridge is currently scheduled to open on March 1st, which will mean the Grand Bridge will close somewhere around March 14th, about a month from now. So very important information I wanted to pass along to you. We'll always, or as always, we'll stay on top of this story for you. You can go to our Facebook page for more information. And now, let's talk about some earthquakes. Did you know that February is Earthquake Preparedness Month? It is. And as you can tell by this next segment, earthquakes also mean business.
The crust here, the Earth's crust, it's old, it's cold, you have these thick piles of sediments. They tend to amplify the shaking. So we've seen in the reports that we get from folks who've experienced earthquakes, even a small earthquake here is going to be felt much, much more broadly than it would be felt out in California.
Even though large earthquakes don't happen much in the St. Louis area, the threat is there. This year marks the beginning of the bicentennial for the Great New Madrid earthquakes of 1811 and 1812. That quake, which was more like a series of quakes, leveled parts of southeastern Missouri as well as parts of Illinois, Kentucky, and Tennessee, and our good friends in Arkansas. To this date, the New Madrid quakes are considered the strongest that have ever hit the eastern United States.
It's not just the big magnitude 7 events that we're concerned about. There also are, a magnitude 6 plus earthquake. The probability there is on the order of 25 to 40% in a 50-year period. Now, that's not going to affect the entire region the same way, but it would be very damaging in the specific area where it hits.
With shaking in mind, business and community leaders gathered last Friday at SLU for the annual Earthquakes Means Business Conference. Attendees, as you can see here, having a lot of fun, heard lessons about previous earthquakes as well as ways businesses can coordinate with responding government agencies.
Government's only one part of response and preparation. A business and a community to get back on their feet and be able to survive depends on that business, because if you lose your business, you don't have a community.
At the conference, both government and nonprofit organizations stressed the importance of being prepared for any disaster. But when it comes to earthquakes impacting the St. Louis area, SLU seismologist Dr. Robert Herman says we don't live in the immediate impact zone.
But fortunately, where the earthquakes occur that really are a problem for St. Louis are about 100 miles away in southeastern Illinois and about 150 miles south of here down the New Madrid region. So the farther away you are from an earthquake, the better you are off, because the ground motion is smaller.
And at that conference you just saw was FEMA's administrator, the top chief, if you will, at FEMA, Craig Fugate. Here is our exclusive interview with the director of the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Well, Mr. Administrator, thanks for coming on Mondays in Midtown.
Well, it's good to be here.
What does this conference mean to you as the director of the Federal Emergency Management Agency? In other words, you come out here, you have business leaders everywhere, people in the community. What does a gathering like this mean to your organization?
That we're getting better prepared. I mean, when you look at, particularly with this threat, the New Madrid seismic zone, it is not something that, if it occurs, will be a localized response. This will be an impact to the entire nation. And there's oftentimes this belief that there's always somebody else that will come in and save you, that if you bring enough feds in, we can take care of everything. The problem is these disasters are so big and complex that if the community itself didn't take steps to get prepared, as well as the state, I don't think there's enough resources we can bring from outside the area to get to everybody fast enough. And that's really, when you're working against time, it's important that the community understands they have a role to play in getting ready for disasters.
What is their role? I mean, what kind of things can the community do? Just a normal nursing student to a teacher in the suburbs? I mean, what can they do to prepare for earthquakes? I mean, in my mind, I don't even think people know about the earthquake threat here in St. Louis.
Well, if they don't, there's a lot of opportunities to learn about it, and hopefully they'll pay attention here. But what happens in any disaster, whether it's earthquake, floods, or others, you have a situation that immediately things are going wrong. There may be injuries, and particularly in earthquakes, people may be trapped and need first aid. Now, here's what happens. If you haven't thought about this and you haven't gotten ready, you're basically saying, I need somebody to take care of me. Problem is, if you could have and you didn't get ready, you're now competing with the most vulnerable citizens in your community. And this is what we're really trying to get across to people. In those first hours and first days, those of us that can take the steps now to get ready for any disaster and take care of ourselves and maybe help our neighbors, we don't compete with infants and children, our frail elderly, people that cannot get the things they need to take care of themselves. So my question or my challenge is, if a disaster happens, why are you wanting to get in line of that toddler or that infant for help? Because you didn't get ready. It may be a flood, it may be a tornado, it could be an earthquake. But in any disaster, those people that have taken the steps to get ready, get prepared, not only can help themselves, they can help the most vulnerable citizens in their community because they're not competing for help.
As a preparedness expert, right?
Well, we do a lot of preparedness at FEMA, yes.
What would you see is the biggest, I don't want to say threat, but biggest concern for not just people in St. Louis, but all across the country in terms of disasters? What type of disaster?
It really depends upon where you live. I mean, there's parts of the country where floods are the biggest risk. There's parts of the country where hurricanes are the biggest risk. But I think as far as the largest scale disaster with the greatest impact in this area, it's an earthquake. You do have flood risk, you do get tornadoes, you get ice storms and winter storms, you may have chemical events, but those tend to be very localized or near proximity to those hazards. This earthquake zone is over 8 states. It would affect over 2 million people simultaneously, and it would disrupt or cut major transportation routes that are necessary for moving goods and products across the entire United States. So your biggest threat is most likely going to be the earthquake threat. So it depends upon where you're in the country, but here, getting ready and being prepared for the large-scale events means you're also prepared for that winter storm that snuck up on us a week ago, and then people couldn't get out, or things happened, or the power went out, and at least you had a flashlight. You didn't have to run to the store because you had some supplies, and you could sit tight until things got better.
And finally, if you could say one thing, just one thing to all these SLU students that watch this show, what would it be? As the FEMA director.
Use your Twitter and Facebook and social media to develop your family communication plan, so if something ever happens here, you can let them know you're okay or that you need help.
I appreciate you coming on Mondays in Midtown.
Thank you.
And again, that was the top guy at FEMA, Craig Fugate. We appreciate him coming on Mondays in Midtown. And speaking of exclusive interviews, because that's all we do, last week my colleague, Brett Kostreski, our senior political analyst here at Mondays in Midtown, sat down with Dr. Michael Cox. He is the chair of the International Studies Department at the London School of Economics. Pretty riveting guy, pretty riveting interview. Take a look.
Well, Dr. Cox, thanks for coming to Mondays in Midtown. Welcome to St. Louis.
It's very nice to be here.
Have you ever been to St. Louis before?
I actually been here before. I I shouldn't say this, but I was lecturing last year in Washington University, so we're rivals across town.
Okay.
Very nice to be back again.
We're happy to have you here. Well, you come at a pretty consequential time going on in the world, coincidentally with the Egyptian riots going on. Do you think that's a symbol of the end of the American empire that you're talking about today?
Well, I think it's one of the great challenges. Yeah, I mean, this was a country which has been stable for 30 years. The United States has overwhelming influence in the region with the elites. And therein lies the problem. Stability with elites is not necessarily stability for the long term. And it is an indication of the enormous shifts and changes that are taking place, not just in the US but around the world. Now, whether you want to say that's American decline or the end of the American empire, whatever phrase
It does
you
mean
want
that
to
the
use.
kinds of challenges facing the United States are, I think, more real, more difficult to resolve, and certainly much more difficult to resolve by themselves,
Right.
by the United States alone.
Now, what do you mean when you in your speech you call it the end of the American empire?
Yes.
What is that economic, military, maybe cultural, or maybe
A
all
bit
of the
of
above?
everything, really. I mean, the term empire itself is problematic when applied to the United States. I know. I almost think of it as a metaphor. I mean, all I'm really thinking of is a very, very great power. I mean, it's a global power, a power which has shaped the destinies and politics and economics of countries around the world. It's still the only global power in the world today. It is the only global power in the world today, unlike China, which is not a global power in any like the same sense, a bit like the British were in the 19th century, where the empire itself kind of raises people's backs a little bit in the United States. But I simply mean it in the sense of being a very, very great power. Right. Now, I think in some senses the United States will remain a very great power, partly because its assets are huge, its geography gives it enormous advantage. Many people want it to stay in the world, and that's the other point. I have a good friend in Norway, a historian, who wrote a wonderful article once called Empire by Invitation. So it isn't that something you're imposing things on other people, although that has happened. It is that many people in many states around the world want you to be there because you pay the bills and keep others from killing each other.
Okay.
You know, I mean, both in Europe and in Asia.
Yeah.
I think in some senses, therefore, there's an embeddedness of American influence around the world which isn't going to go away.
Right. Now, in a lot of ways, Barack Obama's kind of continued many of George W. Bush's foreign policy initiatives, like in Afghanistan, and Secretary Clinton has in some ways referenced the Bush freedom agenda in the Middle East in some speeches. How can you attribute the end of the American empire to President Obama or to President Bush?
Well, I don't really. I mean, it depends how you evaluate the Bush presidency, and only history will tell.
Right.
You know, what's true
Very
now
soon,
may not be seen to be true in 20 years' time. You know, never make assessments over 5 years because you've got to think of 200 years. What did the Chinese leader say of the French Revolution? Too soon to tell, and he said that 200 years after the French Revolution. So it's very difficult making short-term assessments on these things. But I think the United States' position in the world was a good deal weaker than it had been at the beginning. Now, I'm not attributing all of that to the policies of the Bush administration. The challenges were huge. But I think there was no doubt that it had left America's standing in the world much reduced. And where Obama, I think, has been hugely successful, actually, is restoring some part of that standing in some parts of the world, particularly in Europe, where I come from.
Interesting.
I think that is quite important. I'm not attributing to President Obama any great failures in foreign policy. I think in some senses, part of he's been successful in some areas of restoring American standing in Europe, where he's still very popular. He's probably more popular in Europe, actually, than some parts of the United States these days.
Yeah, that's true.
There's no question that his intelligence shines through, and this is an important asset. In fundamental ways, though, Bush is really Obama is a very strong realist. You know, I mean, with Bush at least, you did feel, particularly after 9/11, this kind of the moral urgency of spreading democracy, the freedom agenda, as he called it. And I think he genuinely believed that kind of neoconservative agenda. You know, moral power plus American military might, married together to bring about good things in the world. I do think that Obama has abandoned that.
Yes.
I mean, if you look at Russia, for instance, pragmatism. Russia, you've got to bring in, reset the button, as Joe Biden put it. Why? Because they got nuclear weapons. We need the Russians to help us out in Afghanistan on all sorts of issues. Even towards Iran at first, if you notice, the Obama administration was prepared to deal with the regime as it was. He actually called it an Islamic Republic, symbolic. That was quite important.
Yes, yeah.
Showing it some respect. And of course, that was all overthrown by the revolution. That was really quite complicated thing. You can still see Obama's realism actually in Egypt as well.
Yes.
He's still trying to hang on to Mubarak. You can feel that so there's a deep realism here. And the other broad thing you'd say is that whatever the rhetorical and ideological differences between Obama and Bush, fundamentally, I'm an old-fashioned realist. National interests of states don't change just because American presidents change.
Exactly.
And I think that's an important thing to remember.
Okay. I want to talk about China real quick. They're obviously growing very fast, and some people are saying they're going to replace the United States possibly within the next 10 or 20 years. I saw a debate that you participated in October about the power shift from west to east. You contend that that power shift is not as imminent as some people argue. Maybe what are a couple of reasons you believe that?
I go against the fashion on this one. Because the fashion now is to talk of power shift. The fashion now is to talk of decline of the West, rise of the East, transatlantic region dead, dying, boring, Asia interesting, dynamic. That's where all the emerging markets are. And that's what the economists tell you, by the way. The economists are very keen on Asia, as you know. That's where the future lies. The past is Europe. The past, in some sense, is the United States. Look, are there big economic shifts taking place? Of course there are. China's come up with a formula which nobody dreamed of. Nobody could have even dreamt of this formula of a communist party running a quasi-capitalistic country and out-competing everybody else. And nobody could have foretold either something else, the economic crisis of 2008. And these two fundamental realities have shifted, pulled the ground from underneath us. And I think we're still trying to work out what all that means. Where, however, I think we've got to be a bit careful is I think, firstly, the Chinese themselves are very well aware of how far they've got to go. There's danger of either talking up China's problems and hoping China falls flat on its face. And some people are saying that. Don't worry about its rise, because it's going to fall flat anyway. It's going to have that would be disastrous for China and for us, by the way. But there's another problem of actually overstating Chinese power and strength. And I think there's a tendency now among certain people in the States and in Europe to kind of talk up the China threat a bit too much. China's a problem, but China can also be a solution. China can be a partner, China can be a competitor. And I think it's the complexity of dealing with China. We've got a great vested interest in the West of seeing China succeed. But then we've all got to work together to make sure China's success doesn't disturb the international order. And we haven't found a simple solution to that yet. And that's what we're trying to work towards.
Okay, great. And just want to ask, because you're from the UK, how have you, there's always this aura of a special relationship. I'm sure plenty of British and Americans balk at the term, but do you see the special relationship since the Reagan and Thatcher administrations? Maybe the Obama-Cameron is very different dynamic than we've seen.
Look,
since then.
It does have a deep emotional dimension. It goes back to language, to history, to fighting together in the First World War and in the Second World War, more obviously, liberation of Europe. The Cold War was very much Anglo-America. NATO was very much central. And, you can see that in the historic relationships, the Reagan-Thatcher relationship, the Blair-Clinton relationship, and then, of course, the Blair-Bush relationship. So it clearly does mean something. And I don't think it's just emotion. There are strategic issues involved. There's intelligence sharing. The United States needs reliable and loyal friends, because sometimes you don't have a lot of reliable and loyal friends in the world, and the British tend to be one of them. So there is something special about the relationship. There's no doubt about that. But it's not special in any sentimental sense. Maybe not any. I think it did have a great moral power. And maybe in some senses it still does. I think I don't want to write it off completely. you know, it has got a resonance for lots of people on both sides of the Atlantic, I think.
Okay.
I mean, you know, it's easy to say, well, it's not important. You know, there's Germany, there's Japan, there's China, there's all sorts of. America's a global power, and it has a tough-minded view of all relations with everybody. I appreciate that, and I understand that, but I think there is still a sense of the ease and the habit between, you know, American policymakers, Americans, and British people. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I find that myself personally, but maybe I watch too many Anglo-American films. Or yeah.
That's great. Well, I heard my colleague Mark J. Zinn, who hosts the show, picked you up this afternoon.
Yes.
How did you enjoy your encounter with our host today?
Very good. Oh, right.
He's a big. He loves St. Louis, and I'm sure he's happy to show it out
he showed
for
me.
you.
Yeah, I've been to Missouri as well. I came here about 4 years ago. I worked at I was attending a conference at the Truman Library in Independence. Yeah, so I had a wonderful time.
Oh, that's great. Well,
are you a St. Louian? I mean,
no, I'm actually from New York.
You're
so,
from,
yes,
you're the second person from New York.
Oh, well, there you go. Yeah, there's a few of us out here. But thank you very much for joining us. Very happy to have you, and looking forward to your speech this evening.
Good.
All right.
And again, that was Brett Kostreski, our senior political analyst here at Mondays in Midtown, interviewing Dr. Michael Cox. We appreciate them both for helping us out here. And now it's time for a commercial break. Welcome back from the break. Joining us now is the senior sports analyst for Mondays in Midtown, Willie McKenna. How you doing, Willie?
Doing well. How are you, Mark?
Doing great. You know, there's a lot of news going around the SLU campus about the SLU hockey team. I didn't even know SLU had a hockey team.
Right. It's actually a club team that SLU has. They finished their season 27-5-1, and they actually just finished first place in the MACA division for their club team that they're in. So an outstanding season for the Billikens. And now they're going to keep it on a roll. They're going to head to Peoria this coming weekend for a couple games, and then also off to Chicago to hopefully qualify for regionals, which will then be in San Jose over spring break.
And of course, we'll have a full report on next week's Mondays in Midtown about the SLU hockey team. Our own Taylor McDonald will have more information about that. Willie, it's hard not to walk around St. Louis and not have Albert Pujols on your mind. What's going on with that negotiation?
Well, you know, ESPN reported yesterday that Albert Pujols actually declined an offer from the Cardinals. It wasn't released for how long or how much money he was offered, but it was declined. And it also came out that Matt Holliday, who signed a 7-year, $120 million contract 2 years ago, he deferred money last year to sign some people, and he also was willing to defer money to re-sign Albert Pujols as well. But 2 days is the deadline right now before Albert will become a free agent after this coming season.
And, of course, the pitchers and the catchers have reported to spring training down in Jupiter, Florida.
Right. It's an exciting time for all baseball fans, just trying to get the season going now, and hopefully we'll have more reports in the next couple of weeks as spring training will be getting underway, and, and not too long, and we'll have the season right here at Busch coming up in St. Louis.
Are you going down there? Are we sending you down there for spring training?
I will be down. I will be down in spring training over spring break, actually.
Of course, filing reports for us for Mondays in Midtown. But right now, let's move away from sports. Thank you, Willie. It's now time for communicating with Dr. Z. Schaefer.
So recently in both of my courses, which are Human Communication and Culture and Leadership in Teams, we've been paying attention to the events unfolding in Egypt because it makes for a really interesting case study and also really important historical events. And there are a few things we've been discussing. The first is framing. when students are discussing what's going on over there, they keep using the word rebels about the protesters in the streets. And then I always challenge students to rethink the terminology they're using, because rebels always carry certain connotations, just as freedom fighters would as well. So I encourage students to think about the realities that we create based on the language that we use. The second thing I tell them to think about is context, in the sense of what is going on as a whole picture over there. Obviously you have social upheaval, you have political instability, but then you also have religious division that's getting even more divided as this all unfolds. And you can't look at one of those parts without looking at the other two, because they're all intertwined. The third thing I encourage students to do is to just read widely, become as informed as you can, and share opinions about this, because it is a very important world event. And as citizens of a country where most people, including myself, often take choice, freedom, and democracy for granted, we're getting to see the democratization unfold as it did in our country 200 plus years ago. So I find it to be just a very exhilarating event, and I really encourage students to stay informed and share their opinions. Thank you.
Fascinating segment with Dr. Z. Schaefer. Thanks for communicating with us, Dr. Z. Schaefer. And now it's time for Lyle's Corner.
They're taking my boy out. Yost! 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 They're taking Alan out. Yost! That's my boy!
Dad, when are the Angels gonna win the pennant? Or what was it? When are you and Mom gonna get back together?
Dad, when are we gonna be a family again? Hey, Pat, it's getting late, bud. You might want to go upstairs and get some rest.
Yeah, sure. It's game day. I'm gonna go wait. So.
Hey, buddy, let me know if you need anything, alright? I can bring you something, just let me know. I'll just be right down here on the couch.
Alright, got you on the text.
Just like every other weekend, bud. Hey, I know you've worked hard. You know you've worked hard. You know you're prepared to do big things this year. Just go out there and show them. You know, don't let Coach get into your skin, and just.
Yeah, you know, I'll do what I do. So.
What?
Oh well, anyways, you know, I'm gonna go wait. So.
Just go, just go.
Here you go, man. This is it.
A junior from Delaware, Ohio, number 9, Austin Drive. A junior from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Austin Powell. A junior from Royal Oak, Michigan, number 14, Patrick Ellis. A junior from Hudson, Ohio, number 30.
Now remember, the views expressed on Lyle's Corner don't necessarily reflect those of Mondays in Midtown, the University, or Father Biondi. He's an all-star, though, Biondi and Lyle, for that matter. Our own director, Amanda, has put together this awesome spotlight on St. Louis, featuring the History Museum. Learn something.
This week's Spotlight on St. Louis features the History Museum, located just inside Forest Park. The museum is easily accessible by car from SLU's campus through a straight shot west down Forest Park Parkway, or on foot a few feet from the DeBoliver Metro Station. Outside of the museum is an original loop trolley car that used to serve University City and western St. Louis in the early 1900s. There are talks of reinstating the trolley system, running it from the History Museum to the Lion Gates of the Del Mar Loop. The museum is located in the Jefferson Memorial Building that was built in 1913, When the city decided that it would be a good home for the History Museum, the building was expanded upon into the structure you see today. The museum is a wonderful resource for St. Louis history, with exhibits like Lindbergh and the 1904 World's Fair. Lindbergh profiles the life of aviator Charles Lindbergh, who made the first solo flight across the Atlantic. The exhibit follows his life, highlighting in particular his flight across the Atlantic in the Spirit of St. Louis. It includes a replica of the inside of the Spirit of St. Louis, built by Parks engineering students here at SLU. There is a full replica of the plane that was recently moved from the airport to the History Museum's lobby. The 1904 World's Fair exhibit takes you through the planning, implementation, and final event of the 1904 World's Fair. It shows a map of the park, typical clothing of the fairgoers, a replica of the Ferris wheel, and paintings of the splendor that was the fair, as well as much more. Upstairs are two exhibits that display the history of St. Louis from 1760 to 2000. Let's begin with the first, Currents. The exhibit starts with a timeline of St. Louis history that lines the wall, while the floor is littered with quotes related to the history of this city. The exhibit features many partial reconstructions that bring big events to life. Once you've traveled through Currents, you can continue across the hall to Reflections, 1900 to 2000. This exhibit features many reconstructions as well, but showcases more artifacts than the previous exhibit. While covering the historical events of the century, it also covers the themes and issues important to St. Louisans. Large United States events are covered, but always include how St. Louis reacted. The museum always features two ever-changing exhibits. Currently housed at the museum is the Treasures of Napoleon, which paints a picture of the famous emperor through many of his personal artifacts. While the rest of the museum is free, tickets are needed to this exhibit and cost between $6 and $13. Before you leave, you may want to grab something to eat. Bixley's is happy to serve you in a quick cafeteria format or in a sit-down dining option. Want a souvenir? The gift shop sells items related to each exhibit.
Compelling spotlight segment. Compelling spotlight segment, Amanda. Thanks a lot. We'll be right back with some fun stuff. And welcome back from break. Ladies and gentlemen, you can always email us. mondaysinmidtown@gmail.com, mondaysinmidtown@gmail.com. But apparently you guys don't like the emails. We have one email I'll get to in a second, but you don't like emailing, which is fine. You know, as always, we're trying to touch the Hip Society, or at least get in touch with the Hip Society. So we are on Facebook. You can find Mondays in Midtown on Facebook. You can also tweet me. You can direct tweet me or just tweet me at Mark J. Zinn. One word, no spaces. Our viewer email tonight comes from Cleveland, Ohio. So as you can tell, Mondays in Midtown reaches far beyond the geographical boundaries that give Midtown its identity. Paul says, Happy Valentine's Day to the MIM team, the MIM team if you will. Here's a joke. What did the boy sheep say to the girl sheep on Valentine's Day? I love you. Thanks, Paul, for that message. I hope everyone's having a great Valentine, or you did have a good Valentine's Day. I certainly did. Look at my red tie. Without further ado, let's just do it. Ladies and gentlemen, backed by popular demand, even though we wouldn't know because no one emails us, here is the Alonzo Garbanzo clip of the week. Good night, everyone.
You keep saying you've got something for me, something you call love, but confess you've been messing walk all over you. You've been lying where you ought to be truthing. And you keep losing when you ought to not bet. You've been saying when you should be a-changing, yeah. Now what's right is right, but you ain't been right yet. 'Cause these boots are made for walking, and that's just what they'll do. One of these days, these boots are gonna walk all over you. Yep. Sure will. Here's my verse, I think it's really nifty. See, I'm really not wearing boots at all. I just bought them last week at the Thrifty, yeah. These sneakers are better suited for basketball. Yeah, these shoes are made for dribbling. That's just what they'll do. One of these days, if you don't stand back, I'll dribble all over you.
Heard this a while ago. Happy Valentine's Day. Every day's the 14th.
As I say, whenever you're giving a speech, there's two problems you've got to avoid. One is making the audience go to sleep. The other one is if the speaker goes to sleep. So.
Is this about your dad, Joe? You may say I'm a dreamer, but guess what? I am the only one. You may say that I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. What's love got to do with it? Got to do with it. What's love got to do with it? Right about now, Funk Show Brother. Okay, it's Valentine's Day, and we're hot. That was weird. All right, I am weird. Thank you, David.